This is the Power Break Podcast number 132, titled Needed Interruptions. Hi, I'm Bob Brubaker, along with JT, as we hope you'll stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life.
This is the Power Break Podcast with a focus on the spiritual, the mental, and the physical aspects, all to help you succeed in the race of life. For show notes from today's podcast, go to bobbrubaker.com and follow the link for the Power Break Podcast. What's going on with you, man?
Well, I took a few days off. We're recording a little bit later in the week, but you know, JT, it's good to be back here and get in the swing of things, and it's been a little chilly to swim on these days.
Yeah, I've ducked the old foot in the pool, and there's going to be no swimming in my future. It's brutally cold,
even with a wetsuit. You know, I think it's going to start warming up here a little bit, and then we'll get back swimming down there at the beach. But anyway, I know you've been working out on the mountain bikes and taking the boys out mountain biking.
Yeah. Last weekend it was another 2-day or so. We got back from church and changed and.
Off you went.
Off we went on Sunday, and then we rode all day Saturday. And
what's Amy think of all this?
I think she's just really happy to see the boys really embracing something, to be honest with you, and having it be a consistent thing, you know. Because at their age, they may not have the ability to focus for too long on something, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, it's cool that you were able to do it with them, and stay in shape yourself.
Yeah.
Don't mess with JT. Once he gets back on the road bike, I don't know if I'll be able to keep up with him.
Yeah, I'm not worried about eating your lunch anytime soon. So how was your time away, man?
We had a good time away, visited some family and friends over in the Orlando area, but now we're back here and ready to record as we talk about needed interruptions. That was a little interruption, but let me interrupt things right off the bat and just say thanks for sharing the links and the address of the Power Break Podcast and telling your friends about the Power Break Podcast. JT and I appreciate it. And also, you're leaving the ratings and the reviews wherever you download the podcast.
Yeah, we are so thankful for it. And, you know, it's just always a humbling thing for me that anybody would care about listening to us. So we appreciate it. If you think any of your friends would benefit from it, I would encourage you to share that link.
And we'll shout out to Steve today, huh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Our friend Steve, been a dear friend of mine for a long time. Got to see him yesterday, and we talked a lot of good shop and talked a lot about scripture and a lot about faith, and it was great. It was great to see you yesterday.
It's always good, isn't it? Well, let's talk about interruptions in life. What are some of the things that have interrupted your life, and what was the major interruption in your life, you think?
The major interruption in my life. I kind of was under the impression interruptions was what life was all about. Am I wrong about that?
I think your boys interrupt you a lot. Hey, Dad.
Yeah, no, that's true. They've actually taught me the art of filtering, actually.
Oh.
Yes. Because if I don't filter, it's too much input. They would drive me insane. But interruptions, probably besides all the ones that I think all of us share right now, certainly COVID is an interruption.
Oh, yeah.
The arguments over politics, those are all interruptions. I mean, everything seems to be it's a very unsettled time. So I think a lot of people are having some significant interruptions in their work life and their worship life. I mean, heck, even, going to church has changed, right? How you can do that, and you got to wear a mask, and you have to socially distance. Everything's different. But besides those interruptions, I think the big one for me has always been, when there's a health interruption.
Right.
Because I'm so physically focused on, like you, I mean, you're on the bike all the time. You're always swimming. You're always lifting, stuff like that. Like when I broke my pinky and it is now permanently crooked because, shenanigans with the ER.
Right.
Yeah.
That was an interruption.
That's an interruption, yeah. And I've had to learn how to replay the guitar, honestly, which has been very strange.
That's good for your brain to relearn something.
It actually has been fantastic because, I can't use my pinky. And it's funny, at first, there was a lot of signals, even though I was trying to play the guitar with just 3 fingers instead of the 4. I'd send a signal and the pinky would still try to do its own thing, even though I thought I was sending it a different finger. Yeah, it was weird. But yeah, I think for me, the health stuff, some of the health stuff that I've been through.
Yeah.
And That's a big interruption. And I know for you, it's probably the same thing. How about you?
Yeah, in 2005, when I almost died, that was a pretty major interruption.
That's a big interruption, yeah.
And, of course, things like that in our lives, or the death of a loved one, it's interruption. And just as JT mentioned, things at your job or wherever, there's things that constantly interrupt us. And what we're talking about today is we all have them, interruptions. Sometimes we've just passed over them, but we all have them. And sometimes we just press right on through them, and other times we have to step back, regroup, or maybe start going again in another direction, maybe even in a different direction. One thing for sure we get from the Bible is that those interruptions in life are not by accident. So in the midst of an interruption, we need to all the more trust God, who is in control. That famous verse from Romans 8:28, we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good to those who are called according to his purpose.
Yeah. And as we turn to your blog and we turn to bobrubaker.com, I really think that this is such a pertinent thing for us right now because as I discussed, we're all stuck kind of in an interruption right now. Mm-hmm. But this is a hard one because it's as a police officer, it's beat in your brain, right? You're the man. You're the guy that's going to get it done. If you don't do it, nobody's going to do it. I mean, you're going to take charge. You're going to be all these things, and it's about pride and ego and all these things. But the simple fact is that keeps us from being able to deal with these interruptions correctly because we don't fall back on God. We try to lean on our own understanding, and we fail, right?
That's true.
So, folks, I would encourage you, as always, to go to bobrubaker.com, check out the blog. If you sign up for it, it comes for free. No strings attached. We don't share information with anybody, nothing like that.
Oh,
it's
that's
just
for sure. Yeah.
Every Monday it'll pop in there and it'll be a great start to your week. So let's talk about that and the needed interruptions.
Well, I began on the article with Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, which reads, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." And said there are times when living by Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, it takes a great deal of faith to trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. I say that because there are times that we may not think he has our best interest in mind, but trusting him means just that, trusting him. Case in point is the way that Jesus handled out a lesson of spiritual growth on the way to providing a needed rest and refreshment for the disciples. In Mark chapter 6, it reads that the apostles returned to Jesus and told him that they had done what they had done when he sent them out to minister. And they said to him, he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest for a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure time to eat. And they went away in a boat to a desolate place by themselves. Well, Jesus had sent his disciples out to minister, and they returned after days of hard work, and he encouraged them to get away for a rest because he knew they were just spent. Notice it says that they had no leisure time to eat. That simply means they never took a break, so you can imagine how exhausted they might have been, physically as well as emotionally. They needed to get away from people for a while. They needed rest, food, and spiritual refreshment, so Jesus was ready to provide that, but they provided what they needed, so he called them away by boat to a desolate place. Then it reads that many people saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from the towns and got there ahead of them. And when they went ashore, he saw a great crowd and had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and began to teach them many things.
Shenanigans.
What's going on here? Anyway, Jesus no doubt was exhausted and as hungry as the disciples, but we noticed an important lesson from Jesus. He had compassion. The compassion drove him to put aside his own needs temporarily and the needs even of the disciples for the needs of others. Obviously, in putting aside the needs of the disciples temporarily, he was also teaching them a valuable lesson, a lesson that they seemed to have trouble grasping. Because when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place. The hour is now late. Send them away into the surrounding countryside and villages to buy for themselves something to eat." And he answered them, says, "You give them something to eat." And they said, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them?" In other words, it wouldn't have covered them anyway.
Right.
So you can just hear the disciples groaning with one another about Jesus' preaching that extended late in the day, and then the disciples had empty bellies, tired bodies, and quite frankly did not really care about being with any people at the moment. And their demand that Jesus send the people away was an indication that they were not themselves. What do they call? What's that word that they use now?
Snickers commercial.
Yeah, it's called hangry, right?
Hangry, that's
hangry,
right.
Man.
That's right.
Isn't that interesting that Jan and I were commenting about this because we were listening to a podcast and from Dave Asprey, and he was talking about becoming hangry, and everybody knows what that term is.
Everybody.
I wonder if it's in the new Webster's Dictionary or something. It'd be worth looking up.
I know they add at least a couple of words a year.
Yeah,
and usually it's based on social usage, so why not? Right?
Yeah, from a commercial. Matter of fact, you wonder if the guy that came up with that for that commercial, hangry, because it's a combination of hungry and angry, right?
Hungry and angry.
Yeah. Anyway, so the lesson is that Jesus, of course, took the loaves and fish and multiplied it and provided for the crowd, but also 12 baskets full for each of the disciples, one for each of the disciples. So he showed them he was able to take care of their needs. Now, I also wrote about, just concluded with that, the lesson Peter seems to get. Now, here's what it says in 1 Peter chapter 1. He says, "In this you rejoice." That's the gospel that has come to us and changed our lives.
Right.
He says, "Though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than that of gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in the praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ." In other words, if necessary, your life has been interrupted.
You know, and speaking of interruption, I always, when I read 1 Peter, I always think about this, and then I think about the guy that is depicted in the Gospels.
Oh.
Only an incredibly divine interruption would have caused him to go from being kind of a bumbling fool to being somebody who radiates understanding.
Oh, yeah. And not only that, but preaches with power on the day of Pentecost.
Authority, yes, exactly. It's just amazing to me. But anyway.
Yeah, his life was interrupted. But the point is, and that is out of the article, that Jesus allowed the disciples to be interrupted in their resting time to teach them a lesson and also show them that he would provide. Yeah. And that happens to us many times where our lives are interrupted so that we learn to trust in the Lord with all of our heart and lean not upon our own understanding.
That's right. And I think all of us, well, it's a sanctification process, right?
That special word that
the S word,
that he's changing us to be conformed to the image of his Son, Jesus Christ. Well, the article is called Needed Interruptions. You'll find it at bobbrubaker.com.
So what else is happening, Bob? Anything new this week?
I thought it would be appropriate to step in here and talk about that God's planned interruption on a weekly basis is called the Lord's Day. Sunday. It's a day of rest for us. And I wrote a book about that called Finding Delight in the Lord's Day, and you'll find it at bobbrubaker.com. And I just take you through the way to find delight in that day. Many people take that day and just use it for everything else but worshiping God and spending time in rest, needed rest. So the book is called Finding Delight in the Lord's Day. How can you find that delight? And, the book is there at bobbrubaker.com. And while you're there, check out the sermon links to the sermons I preach here at Christ Community Presbyterian Church in Clearwater, continuing going through the book of Acts at this time. And what a delight it is. Check it all out at bobbrubaker.com.
You know, before we move on to What About This, I wanted to actually ask you, because I have not read that book. That's one of the books that I have not read of yours, at least all the way through. So my question is this, because I did a little studying. There was I don't even know how to pronounce this pastor's name, but I really like him. Bodhi Bukum or
Bodhi Bukum, yeah.
Bodhi? Is it Bodhi?
Yeah.
Bodhi Bukum. So he actually did a sermon that I really enjoyed, and it was about the Lord's Day. And the one part that was very different than what I had learned in other studies on the Lord's Day and finding delight in it was how he talked about what's equally as important as resting on the Lord's Day is working on the others, and how work is a vital part of also worshiping the Lord when you get to that day. And you can't really worship him in the same way if you didn't work.
Right. If you're a slacker all week long, there's not a rest. It says in the book of Proverbs that the rest is sweet to the laboring man.
There it is. Yeah.
And so if a person does not labor during the other 6 days, then there's not the enjoyment of rest. It's not sweet. And it's interesting that even so much so that labor needs to be in anticipation of that rest. You know, that like there's a fine theologian by the name of Sinclair Ferguson who talks about when he was in college, he would work really, really hard on Monday through Saturday to get all of his work, his educational work done, his lessons up, okay, so that on Sunday he did no homework at all. He was totally dedicated to worshiping God and totally resting.
Awesome.
And so the lesson is that how that carries over in life, that if you really want to find delight on the Lord's Day, you work the other 6 days in anticipation of doing anything that would come up on the Lord's Day.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So that's a good point by Vadi, right?
So good. Yeah, it was excellent. And it was something that isn't talked about a lot. So
right. If you're a slacker, then there's no rest for you.
There is no sweetness, people. Sunday is just Sunday to you.
Yeah, you're just if you're a slacker, it's just another day of slackness. Don't be a slacker, right?
Don't be a slacker is definitely very important. That whole discipline thing, I think we wouldn't have a podcast if that wasn't the focus of it.
Well, not only that, but if you read the book of Proverbs, you find slacker or slothful and sluggard, and put those things, just check those out. You'll notice that there is a lot said against being a sluggard or a slacker.
Yeah, there's no positivity in there.
Yeah.
All right, so here we go. It's time for What About This on the podcast. What that is a question and answer that Bob and I do. If you have a question for me or Bob, feel free to send it by email to jt@bobbrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering your question on an upcoming Power Break podcast. Question number 1 is from the spiritual side. So it sounds like from your blog that you're saying all interruptions are like tests for us in a certain way, right? Mm-hmm. So they have a purpose. That's the thing we need to keep in mind. So what are some of the purposes that God has for the interruptions that he gives us?
Probably the number one purpose for an interruption is to cause us or to teach us or to test us in how much we trust in the Lord. It goes back to Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, one of your favorite verses, right? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. That was the case of the disciples when Jesus told them to come away for a rest and then tested them with the crowd and the needed for food. Okay? He allowed that to happen.
Right.
Let's face it, we all can increase our faith, so an interruption that brings us to call upon God and learn to trust him is an important interruption. A very dear friend of mine is in the midst of cancer treatment and had every intention of going for this special treatment that he was supposed to get in California. And he has lung cancer, and he was interrupted from going to this treatment by coming down with pneumonia and had to deal with that before he could go on for treatment.
Interesting.
So, we would look at that and say, how unfair. But wait a minute. When we trust in the Lord with all of our heart and lean not on our own understanding, we have to say, God's in control. He has a reason for this.
Yep.
We don't know the reason. We may never know the reason this side of glory. And when the other side of glory, on the other side, when we're in heaven, we really won't care, right?
That's right.
We don't have to have all of our questions answered. But trusting in the Lord means trusting in the Lord. So first of all, the interruption, we say, what is God doing in this? Well, number one, it would be easy to say he's teaching you to trust.
Right.
And he's saying, hey, do you trust me in this? Trust me. Yeah. I'll take care of you.
And it's hard.
Right. You remember Psalm 23, it says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because
you are with me.
Yeah, because the sheep knows the shepherd is with them.
Right.
Trust the shepherd. Another aim for interruptions in our lives is the need for prioritizing. Many things call for our attention today. And if we aren't careful, we follow those interruptions instead of saying no, just like you were saying, filtering out the interruptions from the boys once in a while.
That's right. You'll never get anything done if you're constantly paying attention to what's going on around you. It's just like, whoa, man. Yeah.
Well, that's what the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians 9 when he said, I do not run aimlessly, or box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching others I should be disqualified. On the same line, then, many interruptions allow us to realize things, our careers, hobbies, even family have taken place in our lives, that the place that only belongs to God. In other words, they've become an idol.
Yep.
God is a jealous God and wants our undivided attention, love, and service. And so he says, the most important commandment is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and all of your strength. In other words, be all in.
Yeah, that's right.
Not partially.
That's right.
And so there is that test when we are interrupted. Oh, is this something that is important?
Right.
We learn to prioritize.
Well, how many times do we get focused on something that we believe is ultimately more important? And then we end up missing all the things that are going on that are coming in and out of our lives. That's happened to me so many times where I'll be like, all right, I know that I'm supposed to be here. And, if you listen to that sentence, the I know is probably the most ignorant thing I could state. And what ends up happening is I ignore all the big, bright red. Man, I keep hitting this microphone.
Sorry, folks. JT's talking with his hands.
That was only my teeth hitting the microphone.
And JT's coming out.
No, you're right about that. I speak with my hands. But all of the things, the bright red flashing signs that are telling me, dude, start paying attention to what's going on around you because there's about to be a disaster. I'm very good at ignoring that if I focus on me and not God and not being in the moment, right? And a lot of times if you get out of control with that, he interrupts you appropriately to get you out of it, because the ultimate thing is you are going to do what he wants you to do no matter what. Right. He's in control.
And he's bringing you around. That's what Romans chapter 8, verse 29 says, that he has predestinated us to be conformed to the image of Jesus Christ. His predetermined destiny is that we would be conformed in our character to that of the Lord Jesus Christ.
Right.
And so he's constantly working that in our lives. And so, remember it says in Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, that he who has begun a good work in you will continue to do it, will perform it until the day of Jesus, until the resurrection, or until you stand before him in heaven.
Right.
So he will continue to work that in you.
Right.
So that's what's going on.
Awesome. All right. Question number 2. It's from a mental standpoint. And this is stuff that is so important for us to get. How can a person prepare for the interruptions so that when the interruptions actually occur, they're not thrown into an emotional pit or tailspin or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah.
Like they're just like, oh yeah, here it is. I'm good. I'm ready to go. So we don't spend so much time in the shock of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, if we say plan for it, that that interruptions will come. Everybody knows that.
Yep.
We know they're going to come somehow.
Yep.
We don't know when, how, or where, but knowing they will come, so it's good to have a plan of action for when they do come.
Right.
For instance, like when you're riding your bike, do you get flat tires on the mountain bike?
Not as much.
Okay.
And most of that is because, this gets technical, but it's all, it's tubeless, and there's a lot of sealant in there. So basically it's like a big plastic flexible, it's almost like caulk on the inside of your tire.
So when a puncture happens, it just sprays for a moment and then it just fills it up, right?
That's it. Yeah. It's like platelets in the blood. That's the way that it acts.
Ooh, I'm impressed, JT. It's that
I
master's
don't know where
degree.
that came from. If it's impressive, it wasn't me. I can tell you that.
Well, the story I've told of really good triathletes, when I did those, the coach told us to make sure that we've gone through a variety of scenarios in your mind before you race so that you can handle the things when they come. So here's the really good part of being a follower of Jesus Christ. We are assured of the fact from the Bible that God has a plan for every interruption in our lives. So get ready for it. That's why in 1 Peter chapter 1, he says, in this you rejoice, so now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials or interruptions. Okay? We know that they're going to happen. So it's kind of like you on Sunday. You're getting ready to play your guitar. I'm sure that you have in mind, as you're ready to play with your worship team, an idea of things that could go wrong.
Yes, I do, because they all have. At some point or another, they all have. And I had the audacity at the time to be surprised, and now you just get to the point to where that's what you expect.
Yeah, isn't that sad? That guy named Murphy. What do they call him? Murphy's Law.
That's it.
If anything bad can happen, it will.
It will, and at the very worst time. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if that's what was the theory behind Murphy's Law, but that's what it is. It's you're preparing for the fact there's going to be an interruption. You don't know what it's going to look like.
Yep.
But let's have a plan of action.
One of the things that was sobering for me when it comes to like health, and I think like all of us are going to have a health issue. I know that's probably a shock to everybody at some point or another, because guess what? We're all going to die.
Yeah.
At some point or another, we're all going to die. And our body's going to age in different ways, and many of us we'll all have different health issues. But it's weird because you never really wrap your mind around it until it starts to happen to you.
And then you're shocked.
And then you have the nerve to be shocked. You're like, well, something's going to kill me. I mean, that's kind of the way it works, right?
Yeah.
Just being prepared for those things because they're going to happen.
Yeah, that's right.
Makes a very big difference, and it has a lot to do with joy, which is a totally different topic for me. Finding joy in...
Well, that's an evidence that you're trusting in the Lord, right?
Yeah.
If you're trusting in the Lord, you're depending upon the Spirit of God, and the fruit of the Spirit is love, and what's the second one? Joy. Peace.
Yeah. So, I think about Paul at the end of his ministry, like the second half of 2 Timothy, the letter.
Right.
And I think about all the people that he talks about, and he talks about a lot of the people that had abandoned him, right? And I think about that at the end of the day, that, he was still able to find joy, even though he was in prison. He knew he was dying. And so many people had walked away from him, and he was still able to find joy in the fact that the joy was really in doing the Lord's will.
Right.
It was really in the triumph that the Lord has already
He says, I fought the good fight, and I kept the faith.
Yep.
And there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness.
Yeah. And that's where you find the joy.
Exactly.
But we always have the nerve to be like,
I can't believe this is happening to me.
Unbelievable. You mean I'm 50 and I have a health problem?
Yeah.
The nerve.
Right. Actually, if you really look at all the things that our bodies have resisted up to this point, it's really a miracle that any of us are alive at all the time.
Yeah.
That's a miracle that God has placed in our bodies that we fight off infections and disease all the time.
Yep. And instead of being grateful, we focus on it's not going to last forever, so shame on that.
Yeah.
It's all right, so let's actually turn to the physical, since we kind of did.
Yeah.
And the third question. Let's talk about intermittent fasting. You and I have done so much research on it. You and I have both dabbled in it. Maybe me a little more than you, but I'm not sure.
I don't know. I think you're an expert in this. So
I'm certainly not an expert, but I do know that it works. But do you have any thoughts on how this can influence your training, how you can kind of work it in and use it to your advantage as far as building a stronger, better, faster?
Actually, it's interesting we talk about this because Jan and I are going through Dave Asprey's new book called Fast This Way, or something like that. Anyway, it's a good book, and also listening to some of his podcasts on that. All the benefits, of course, in intermittent fasting include weight loss, training your body to burn fat, decreasing inflammation. So when you're talking about training, all those things are necessary, right?
Yeah, that's right.
First, I'd say that JT is more of an expert on this than I, but Jan and I have been following Dave Asprey's book, and also we found that bulletproof coffee that he talks about in that book with MCT oil and butter really does carry you through the 14 to 16-hour period of not eating. So it's good stuff, and I also have done some workouts recently on a fasted state, and although they recommend not doing anything anaerobic, I have a little bit, did not really feel a lack of energy that I thought I might.
Yeah, it's amazing to me what the body can do, and it's amazing to me how much we've kind of coddled it to a certain extent.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I used to kind of think about a lot of the things that I used to do or athletes have done, and it's always sobering when you have somebody who really knows what the body can or can't do, like a lot of the survival experts and stuff. They're like, "Oh, congratulations, you ran 5 miles. Did you know that your body can go without food for 21 days before you would ever have any kind of emergency issue with it?" And I'm like, 21 days? Yeah. And that's constant physical activity for 21 days before your body would start to break down. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And we never come close to it, but we pat ourselves on the back for going one day. Right?
Yeah, one day, or, the recommendation even is, I appreciate what Dave Asprey says in the new book that, 5 days a week is enough for the, at most for the intermittent fasting. Some people do it every day.
Some people do it every day. Yeah,
he says it's really most effective. Anyway, it's good stuff, and it's worth exploring, folks, so that we want to encourage you to take it up. At least for thinking about it, those of you that are working out, especially for those benefits, just check it out, read up about it. Anyways, it does take discipline to do that, and as we always mention, that discipline makes the difference in all aspects of life. Check out today's show notes at bobbrubaker.com. Click on the Power Break podcast. Today is show number 132.
And submit your questions by email to jt@bobbrubaker.com and listen for Bob's answer or my answer on an upcoming Power Break podcast.
Real quick, mention the book, Finding Delight in the Lord's Day. You'll find it at bobbrubaker.com. Click on the resources, scroll down through the books. You'll find it. A cup of coffee and,
cinnamon roll.
A cinnamon roll.
Delicious.
Yeah. Speaking of...
I was going to say it's the opposite of fasting.
Anyway, check it out. Finding Delight in the Lord's Day at bobbrubaker.com.
Well, thank you for joining us for the Power Break podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review wherever you've downloaded the podcast. And check out show notes, news, Bob's weekly blog, and other cool things at bobbrubaker.com. And listen next time for the Power Break podcast.